Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Fellman, and today I have with me Beanie Geoghegan. Did I say it right? Every time.
Hagen, it's okay.
Geoghegan. Okay.
It's okay.
I apologize. I blame the COVID.
There you go. And you can do that for weeks. It's fine.
Yeah, right. It's the brain fog. So Beanie has graciously decided to join me again on this program to talk about something I don't think gets enough airtime, and that is how we're teaching our kids to kind of see the world around them. Before we dive into this wonderful topic, though, I would like to ask you to please consider liking this video and sharing the broadcast so we can get more people on to ask us questions and join in the conversation. Beanie is a teacher right now in a private school, correct? And you're teaching English?
I've volunteered to teach
Volunteer, okay.
civics and reading.
Civics and reading, right? And so I've been watching her Twitter feed with interest because she is devoted to teaching classic literature, which is something that is very near and dear to my heart, and giving her students, a look at beauty every single day. And she put up a tweet, which I put into the description. And I'm going to read it because it was sort of the foundation for this conversation. The lens through which you view the world around you will dictate whether or not you see only flaws and obstacles or beauty and possibilities. Our schools should be teaching students to view the world through one that sees the latter, and they're not. And that really resonated with me. I agree so much. I'm seeing a lot of negativity, a lot of focus on injustice, a lot of focus on what's wrong, and I'm not seeing a lot of what's right. So what prompted you to, did you feel similarly when you wrote that?
Definitely. I mean, this is, the last 2.5 years, we've seen so much of that. And, I've shared with you before how I've seen it in my high schoolers classes when they were online and that kind of thing. And through these last couple of years, I've really delved into C.S. Lewis's work and his fiction and nonfiction writings. And I came across this quote, and it ties right into this. And it probably is what prompted me to say that, since it is so likely that children will meet cruel enemies, let them at least have heard of brave knights and heroic courage. Otherwise, you are making their destiny not brighter, but darker. And so the reality of that is, life is hard, and we are all, for the most part, I think, going to come up against obstacles, whether they are obstacles that are there because of the choices that we've made, or obstacles just because that's life, kind of thing. And sometimes we run into those things. And what we want to make sure that we're teaching our kids is that that's not the end, that there's, there are knights who conquer those dragons. There's people who overcome those things. And in the process and in the journey, there's beauty all around you. So don't forget to stop and take all of that in and appreciate that. And I just think even the books that are being used in school right now, they're not necessarily choosing literature because of its quality or because of its because it's so beautifully written or well written or anything like that. It's because it has a point, and because it's going to teach a social justice issue, and it's going to teach some group how this other group was so bad to this group and that kind of thing. And it's like, you know what? That's been happening since the beginning of time. Let's introduce literature where there were different groups coming together, and maybe coming together in disagreeing and that kind of thing. But then let's talk about how that ended up, and how the hero won, and how the good won over the evil. And I feel like right now, all we focus on is the evil, and we don't even focus on how the good overcomes the evil. And so I think, while I did not go to classical education, my children were not classically educated. I have done a lot actually of investigating here lately on classical education. And that's really one of the beautiful things about classical education, is how much they focus on seeking beauty and pursuing excellence. And it's kind of like you keep your eye on that, and that enemy or that evil or that bad thing doesn't seem so big. But when all you focus on is your problem or the bad guy or your enemy, then all of a sudden you're staring Goliath in the face and you're not feeling quite as brave as David. You're feeling like those, the Israelites who didn't think they had a hope. So
Right.
I just think that we are robbing children of the opportunity to experience beauty through other experiences.
Now, what would you say to those who say, well, that's why we're focusing a lot of our attention on social emotional learning? That's why we are checking in with our students every day and taking their temperature and asking them how they're feeling. What do you say to that?
Well, I know. So I have 4 kids, and when my kids were little and they would get hurt, um, and they wanted sympathy, they would come to me because I would be the one that would soothe them and rock them and pat their back. And, when that could go on for an hour because I was mommy and that's what mommy was going to do. Now, if they just wanted a momentary attention and then go on and play, they would go to daddy because daddy's going to go, oh, blah, 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 and blow on it and make them laugh, and they would be off to play. So it's more of like, okay, do you want the kids to focus on all the reasons they should be sad? Do you want the kids to focus on all the reasons in the world that they should be afraid? Or do you want the kids to recognize that, acknowledge it for what it is, and then triumph over those things and go on and achieve from there? So I just think the more you focus, and I think I was reading an article a few weeks ago, and they cited a place where the more you focus on the pain or the sadness or all of the reasons to be sad, the more you respond to that, you physically do respond to that. So I think that if we could maybe stop focusing on that so much in our schools, we might have fewer mental health issues. And I am not negating mental health issues. I definitely think that, especially over these last 2 years, there have been some serious things pop up. But I do just wonder if you don't have this almost like leading the witness kind of thing that, are you feeling depressed today? I was a teenage girl. There were a lot of days I would have been able to check that box,
Sure.
It
Yeah.
was really just normal teenage yucky stuff. And
Right.
again, not negating genuine mental health concerns, but I think sometimes we, especially now, fall into the danger of putting everything in the box of trauma and things that require, mental health professionals, when it's really just normal teenage angst that they need to deal with. I hope
Well,
that doesn't sound cruel and unusual.
no, I mean, I think if you focus on something, it seems common sense. It seems like common sense that if you think about something a lot and you focus on it a lot, you're not really fixing it. You're not really helping. You're just focusing on it. And so, yeah, I have not noticed a whole lot of solutions,
Yeah.
baked into this. So it's not like, oh, look, that they'll say, we're going to ask these questions and then we're going to refer for supports, but the supports are always of a clinical nature. Um, and one thing I don't think that gets talked about enough is that not everything that is going wrong in your life has a clinical solution. So to your point about literature, that's certainly not clinical. Like that's not therapy, but for some people, getting lost in a story or learning about, gaining perspective from somebody else's experience could be therapeutic.
Right. I actually wrote an article about that several months back. It was titled SEL through literature, which probably wasn't the best title because I got attacked from people who don't like SEL. And I
Right.
wasn't promoting SEL, but what I was saying was we really already have a lot of those elements in place through our literature. In fact, one of my students, this just excited me to no end. Last Thursday when I was there, I said, well, we need to talk about what book we're going to read next. And she said, oh, wait just a minute. I got to go get you the book I'm reading right now. You're going to love this. And she ran out of the room and came back and handed me kind of this old hardback book with the gold, on it. And I'm like, what is this? And I look at the spine and it's Pride and Prejudice. Now, mind you, these are inner city kids. These are kids who have been in public school up until this August. Most of them were about 2 years behind academically when they started this school, and introducing, classic literature was sort of, I was questioning or whatever. So she shows me this book, and all of these students are African-American as well. So she shows me this book, Pride and Prejudice, which is, one of my all-time favorite books. I mean,
Yeah.
my heart almost just exploded right out of my chest when she showed me this. But she didn't just show me the book. She started to tell me about the life of Jane Austen. She started to tell me about the characters that she was reading. She started to tell me how she relates to those characters and the things that they're working through. And this young lady is almost 18 years old. She's getting ready to go out into the world, and she could totally relate to this story. And she was working through some of those things through this story. And the same thing, I think, with Charlotte's Web, which is not classic literature, I guess, but that was the very first book I ever read with these kids. And we were reading Charlotte's Web. And it was amazing how some of the things that they dealt with through there, to me, it was considered social emotional learning. They were learning how to deal with loss, how to work through friendships, how to deal with difficult people when all the animals in the barn don't get along, kind of thing. And at the end of the book, towards the end, when Charlotte dies, actually 10-year-old boys sitting there crying, while I'm reading that. And when I looked up and saw them crying, it was, again, just one of those moments. And I thought it just made me realize how we don't need billion-dollar programs to teach these students how to deal with emotions and how to deal with different situations. Some might need that, but I'm going to guess that if they need that, they probably need that beyond what a public school can offer them. But I do think so much of this stuff, when they read about other people experiencing this, I mean, so many of our classic novels are about teenagers, the main characters are teenagers. And they can learn about how they dealt with those things, whether they overcame them heroically or whether they just mustered through and made it out, on the other side. But I definitely think we can pull those elements in without incorporating some of this other stuff that to me is very dangerous, teetering on the edge of teachers practicing psychology without a license. And also then again, leading the witness to make students believe that their normal teenage angst is actually, clinical depression or anxiety or whatever it is. That, teenagers for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years have been dealing with a lot of these same issues. So.
Right. And I mean, teenagers have dealt with them through things like wartime and the Great Depression and, the 60s and, the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I mean, every generation, it seems, has had their thing, that's not to belittle what the kids are going through right now or to say that it isn't in some ways unique. But I do think that we are missing opportunities when we feel like we have to reinvent the wheel. Like, oh no, this is novel, so we have to have like a novel solution when we've had solutions for generations to these problems. What about what about people who say that it, the hope that you're giving the students or the material that you're giving the students has to be representative? In other words, that it won't help them if it doesn't look like them or sound like them, or, they can't take hope away from that. And then you've already just described somebody reading Pride and Prejudice, which I have to laugh because, that's nothing like my life either. Right.
Right.
Like, we might be white, but, I'm sorry, my life isn't anything like.
Right. Well, that's what I related that to, like, I didn't read Moby Dick because I'm white. It's like, it's not, I don't actually think that, the literature needs to be representative for the students to get much out of it. That's not to say that it never should be. And I certainly, love sharing with these students about Booker T. Washington and Thomas Sowell. And, that we definitely incorporate that. We talk about Frederick Douglass a lot in there. But that's not really representative of them either, because even those individuals led a completely different life than what my students lead. So I think that when you read about other people's experiences and other people's just way of living, you learn and you grow. And somebody said this the other day, I don't know who it was. I can't claim this quote, but they said, I don't grow, I don't change when I look in the mirror. I change when I look out into the world and see other people and how they live. And I think that that's very true. I think, we can sit in our little space and think that we're doing just fine and everything's just fine. And then 20 years later, walk out of our house and realize we've not changed in 20 years. But we think we're doing great. And I actually think that reading books from authors and, about situations that we would never have experienced is a growing experience. One of the most moving and touching books that I ever read was Sounder, and that was in elementary school. And it had absolutely nothing to do. There was nothing I could relate to in the book Sounder. But I still remember very vividly reading that book and how it impacted me so very much for a lot of different reasons. I don't know why, but it's, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Can't relate to Charlie, one of my all-time favorite books. Even when we read Charlotte's Web, my students were mesmerized by Charlotte's Web. They absolutely loved the story. They live in the urban area in our city. They can't relate to the characters in Charlotte's Web or even life on a farm in the 50s. What's her brother's name? I can't remember her brother's name now, but he, brought his BB gun to school, and they were like, "He did what?" And I'm like, "Well, this was in the country back in the 50s. This was a different time." And, we got to talk about that. So, no, I actually think that reading literature sort of outside of our world grows us. I think, we read Charles Dickens because of that, because we want to know what that life was like. My very favorite genre is World War II historical fiction. Yeah. I can't relate to it, but I want to know about it. I want to know, in almost all of the stories that I read about it, good wins or people grow and learn from their experiences. And I want to know about that, not because I ever want to go through World War II or have ever been through anything like World War II, but I want to know how they survived it and overcame the struggles that they faced. So, right. Yeah, I don't think that it necessarily needs to be representative. Now, I will say when I was in middle school, and don't judge me for this, but I did fall in love with the Sweet Valley High series, which I know is not quality literature, but I could relate to that as a middle school student because they were just dorky little books, and they were having boy trouble and all that kind of stuff. And those were fun. There's a place for that. There is a place for that, but it's not necessarily in the classroom setting where as a whole group, you sort of develop this community where you're all, sort of wrestling with the different things that are going on in the story. And so.
No, about that, a lot of parents are just becoming aware of the fact that schools, by and large, don't do that anymore. So in other words, in your school, you were doing it. And when we were growing up, we would all read the same book at the same time and we would discuss it and so on. But I'm discovering as a tutor, and then parents are coming to me and saying this as well, that their students are not necessarily reading the same book, or if they are, they're reading it, they're sort of alternating between reading it and listening to it. So they'll listen to the audio chapter, then they'll read a chapter, then they'll listen. Yeah. And they don't have discussions. So in other words, what they'll do is they'll read, and then they're given like a short answer questionnaire to fill out or something like that. And it makes me so sad because I feel like the kids are seeing the reading as an exercise in box checking and not as something immersive where they're going to talk about it. And I asked one of my tutoring students about it. I said, why are you listening to half the chapters? She said, well, because not all the kids in the class can read it as well. And so, they're not just missing out on the great literature, they're missing out on the entire process because there are kids mainstreamed into their classes who literally can't read the books.
Yeah, we have a really unique experience at More Grace at the school I volunteer at because it's like a one-room schoolhouse, basically. We have the students that I teach range in age from 10 to 18, and I've got 15 of them, 14 of them, and some of them are very capable of reading any of the books that I put in front of them, and some of them would struggle. It's at least to read it at any kind of pace where it would be enjoyable to them. And so what we do right now is I read out loud. They all have a copy of the book, and they all have to follow along as I read. And we did the same thing when we were going through the Declaration of Independence and Constitution and stuff. It's like, I want you to be looking at the words while we do this. And so now some of my older students, when I'm not there, will go get the book and we'll read ahead. So they're certainly welcome to do that. But we always have discussions about it, because that's just so important to sort of work through that. And then they don't see it as an assignment. They want to talk about it. They want to talk about the story. They want to talk about the characters. They want to ask why, the author decided to do the things that she decided to do. And so I think that is really important. And it's just, some of them disagree that they like, this community the way that it is. And others are like, no, I wouldn't want to give up. And so those are really interesting conversations and good conversations to have. And you teach kids how to have civil discourse with each other. And
well, right. I mean, if you're sharing the experience of a book and talking about it with each other, yes, you're learning. That does seem a more organic way to learn sort of social and emotional skills.
It does, yeah.
Because
yeah.
Yeah.
There was a gentleman that I met back when we were shut down with schools. I was working with a student who needed to be in school, and we didn't have many options here. And so there was a homeschool pod that was open. Again, it was downtown. And so I went with the mom and the daughter to see if this was a good fit for her. And while I was there, I met one of the male teachers that was there. His name's Coach E. And not a thing in common with this man, not a thing in common with anybody there that I knew of. And we were just out there talking, and we were talking about how hard it is to get teenage boys to read. And this was I think every student in there was African-American as well,
Mhm.
but we weren't necessarily talking about African-American males, just really teenage boys in general. A lot of times don't like to read. It's not cool. They're busy doing sports. They're, whatever, all the different reasons. And he was saying that it wasn't until he was like in his early 20s that he really fell in love with reading. And of course, then me, I'm like the book nerd. I'm like, oh, well, I had just finished reading Pride and Prejudice. And he's like, I just finished that too. Well, lo and behold, he and I stand there for about half an hour, 45 minutes and just chat about Pride and Prejudice and everything that, all of the different topics that came up in the characters and we clicked. This man who he and I, shared probably nothing else in common in the world, but we had just read the same book and it happened to be a great book. And we were able to have that connection. And I think those are the connections that our students are missing out on. And instead they're connecting on really trivial temporal things that are happening in the world, the current events and all that kind of stuff. It's like, those are more divisive than connecting, I think. I can disagree with the way somebody believes or thinks about Pride and Prejudice without feeling shunned. There are some topics that come up in classrooms today that I think students don't necessarily feel comfortable saying, I have a different point of view. I mean, I think that the points of view on literature that they're reading, which then sort of reflects their point of view on current events, probably without even having to bring up those hot topics. They can share those openly and comfortably without escalating a situation by saying, commenting on a news story or a current event that's happening that would be a very divisive thing in a classroom. So,
well,
we have a lot of students just sitting quietly, not saying anything in classes right now because they don't want to say the wrong thing.
Yeah. And I think one of the benefits of reading books that are, about people you don't relate to, or in other words, it doesn't have anything to do with your life or the world in which you're living right now. It's from the past, or it's from, just a completely different, worldview, is you get a certain amount of emotional distance. Like you said, you can discuss the themes, you can discuss the characters and their, their conflicts or their obstacles that they're overcoming, whatever, without it being personal.
Yes.
And I think what I'm concerned about is we're not really giving kids today a whole lot of space. And especially if you're talking about middle school and above, these are kids who are, developmentally, they're trying to figure out who they are. And, the more that adults kind of encroach in on that space, I think the harder it is. I don't think, I think even if people are well intentioned and saying, well, we want to make sure they're, mentally well and all this, I think it's like trying too hard,
Yeah.
And kids, what I remember from being a teenager is, first of all, kids have really finely tuned BS detectors. So they know when people are trying too hard. They know when they're being, pandered to, placated, like they know what they either like are grossed out by it or they use it, which
Yeah.
neither of which is really good. And what I think they don't have enough of that we enjoyed when we were kids, growing up in the 80s, we had lots of emotional space from the adults in school. I really felt like a big amount of distance between myself emotionally and my teachers, and I liked it. In other words, they didn't really know me and I didn't really know them, and I liked it that way. Like it was, you know, comforting.
Yeah, boundaries are so healthy. And
Yeah.
I use the example of, I remember when I would go to the grocery store and I would see one of my teachers in the grocery store and I felt sort of embarrassed and awkward, like I was somehow invading their private space and they were also invading my private space and we didn't belong in that space together because our place belonged
Yeah.
in the classroom. And now you have teachers talking about their personal sex lives with students and it's like, whoa, we've crossed boundaries big time, I mean, it's
Yeah.
like, we don't. So I think boundaries, and not necessarily just in schools, I think boundaries between young people and adults have really been blurred. Just
Mhm.
my kids actually still grew up with yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes sir, no sir, but so many grew up with just first name basis or just a term, hey dude or whatever. And I'm like, boundaries are just really healthy, whether it's language or actions or ideas that you're sharing with people. And I think it was okay. I had a field hockey coach who actually just recently passed away, and she was wonderful in high school, and she was that one teacher that you could go to, or the one coach. I never had her as a teacher, but I had her as a coach. I could go to her and I could have shared with her if I was dealing with something. She would have responded as a parent would have responded, in the sense of not affirming, not making me feel like what I was doing was right, but much more stern, strict disciplinarian, like, well, you know what the right thing is to do, and you just need to kind of work through it. And I think, unfortunately, now we have more of the just want to be friends kind of relationships between students and teachers. And I would not encourage my children to go to their teachers for that reason. And just, it's like, I don't trust that they would give them adult level
Mhm.
advice, unfortunately. So,
Yeah, and I think some of these adults involved in education are trying to pass this off to parents like this is a good thing.
yeah,
That, the parent that the teachers, love the kids or have this like bond or whatever. And I don't see any evidence for that. I'm not really seeing that as being a good thing. In fact, I'm seeing evidence that it is actually the opposite, like toxic. And, when you reduce that emotional distance, then the student doesn't really get the chance to form their own opinions. They don't really, um, now they've got to be concerned about disappointing somebody else, like not just mom, not just dad, not just
or
themselves,
pleasing
or
someone else.
pleasing somebody else. And it's not really their job to please the teacher. It's their job to go to school and, learn, but that it's not a transactional relationship. They're not in. I mean, some will say, "But what about the grades?" And yeah, we can have a whole show about whether grades are kind
Yeah,
of causing that, but we I don't think we want to encourage that. I don't think we want to encourage our kids to be trying to please the teacher as opposed to learn for their own sake.
right. And I'm not sure where I don't know where it started. I'm sure someone's done a study on it to find out. But it's like, when did we start expecting schools to act as like a co-parent with us? Or, I mean, I send my kids off to learn how to read and write and do math, and I
Mm.
I'll take care of the the raising of my kids. I just really need you to, educate them in the academics. And somewhere that got muddied somewhere along the line. I think because I'm volunteering at what is essentially a one-room schoolhouse, I think a lot about those original one-room schoolhouses and how really the kids came and they learned. They would go home for lunch. They would not be fed at school. They
Right. Yeah. Remember that?
they would bring their pail of lunch or whatever.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
when the school day was over, they would leave, and that was it. And I think, wow, we have shifted, and some of the things that have come in have been good. And I'm glad that no child has to try to go through their school day hungry and that kind of thing. But we really have sort of scooched the parents over a little bit and said, you don't need to do that. We'll take care of that for you. And I find that the more you tell parents, you don't need to do that, we'll take care of that for you, the more parents are like, oh, good, I don't have to fool with that. School will take care of that for me. And a good example is at the schools that my kids attended, because of the percentage of free and reduced lunch, every student who attended their school could eat breakfast and lunch for free. Every student, no matter what. It didn't matter if your parents made $1 million or $100, every student. So I could have sent my kids off to school without feeding them. There was no reason for me to do that. They had the time, we had the money, we had the food, we could have sat down and ate, but if I wanted to, I could have sent them off to eat for free at school. And I think that unfortunately that's sort of what has happened. It's, I remember as a kid before going to school, we sat and read the cereal boxes together at the breakfast table. And we, and that was a time for our family too, because sometimes dinner time was tough. And so breakfast time was a good time for us. But there are busy parents, both parents are working. It's just easier to put little Johnny on the bus and let school take care of feeding them. And doesn't matter what kind of conversations happening around the breakfast table at school. That's not, their concern. And then little Johnny stays after school at the after school care. And it's like, wow, we really have just, parents are only needed for about 3 hours a day anymore. And
well, and then what's happening is there's this mixed message. On the one hand, the experts will say, like, we're the experts and we've got this, and we need to make sure that these kids are fed and this and that and the other. And then they'll turn around after parents go ahead and take advantage of these things, and they'll say, oh, the parents just want to use school as their daycare. And it's like, well, y'all set it up that way.
right.
It's not like, I'm not seeing parents banging down the door saying, you better feed my kid or I'm not going to feed my kid.
Right.
It's more like somebody somewhere, some policymaker decided that all the kids need to be fed breakfast and lunch, and because some of the kids were needing it. And now when parents take advantage, it's like, well, it's your fault. Or when the kids are, like you said, the parents are trying to get it, be taken seriously by their children when they are only seeing them for 3 hours a day. And they aren't, and the kids aren't behaving very well or whatever. And then the school says, well, it's because of poor parenting. Like, well, y'all had them for like 8 hours
or more.
5 days out of 7.
Yeah.
And why is it that the 3 hours that the parents had them, during which time they were trying to do all the busy work you assigned, by the way, in the Chromebook, where it's completely hard to find anything, and now you're battling with the parents.
Right.
Why is that when the bad manners happen?
Yeah. And so I won't give parents a pass on this, because I believe that, first of all, I believe that those first 4 years, 5 years, that is when parents really need to be just pouring into their young kids. And
I agree.
And really cultivating that, which I did for mine. And I also saw that light get snuffed out at a certain level in school. So, and then I will also say that just because a school offers a program, that doesn't mean parents have to take advantage of it. That's really hard to say, because it's like, well, but they're offering me, free. And it's like, okay, but they're your children. You had them not so that you could allow the government to raise them, but you had them so that you could raise them, and so that you could shape their hearts and their minds. And if you don't choose to take advantage of that, don't be surprised when they grow up and graduate from high school or college and don't enjoy your company anymore, or don't share your same values and beliefs, because you handed them over to the government for the government to raise them how the government sees fit. And you and I mean, that takes us back to, full circle to government schools are not interested in cultivating that virtue and beauty and pursuit of excellence. And, it's what do we need to teach this next generation so that they are productive citizens, not about, being virtuous citizens, not about seeking beauty, creating beauty. It's about being productive.
I'm not even so sure they're focused on the productive part anymore.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's kind of
it feels more like destructive in terms
at
of
one point in time, anyhow. So schools certainly play a role in it, and but again, I can't give parents a pass on it, because just because the government offers something doesn't mean you have to take advantage of it. They're your children, and we can't rail against the system if we are failing on our end of responsibility. And I speak as a mother of four, a busy mother of four, who had plenty of other things to do at the time, but my number one priority was my children always, and same with my husband. And so that needs to be said. I think, again, not giving schools a pass, but we can't give parents a pass either. And the beautiful thing about what the last 2 years has brought is, I think, sort of a refocus on families, that parents have pulled back, whether they're single, married, divorced, whatever. I think that they've all sort of taken a step back and said, we've been missing our kids. Like, we've been missing this time. And, let's rearrange things. I've seen parents who have decided to go back down to one income because they felt like that this was a really important thing for them to do and to be engaged. And it's not doable for everybody, but it's been a good thing. I think that the shift has gotten back to, we've got to take care of our families, and we have to make sure that we are that primary influencer in our kids' lives, and that it's not the government schools doing that. And in doing that, hopefully we put back that cultivation of appreciating and seeing beauty. And those things are free. You can take your kids to the park and teach them.
Well, that was going to be my next question, was what do you advise parents who are facing, where their kids are coming home from school and they're kind of down, or they're coming home with the latest, greatest story of woe, like, Mom, did you know there's a war, whatever. Like, I mean, what do you recommend to parents to kind of, get between their kids and the full on negative everything?
So I had a conversation with my students. It was several months back, about the different lenses that you can view life through. And I am a firm believer in viewing life through the lens of gratitude will shift everything. And again, we know that there's bad things that happen. I'm not talking about living as a Pollyanna, but I think that you take a step back and you give thanks in all circumstances for whatever you can give thanks for at the time. And because we were talking about the difference between viewing life through the lens of victimhood, which my students are often encouraged to do, unfortunately, or viewing the life through a lens of gratitude, and just how it shifts things so much. And rather than looking at a situation and seeing all of the horrible things that have happened or that are, a result of it. Okay, well, what good has come out of it? I mean, we can go on and on and on and on about the horrible things that came out of the government's response to COVID. We can also turn that on its head and look at all of the good things that have come out of it. And that list can go on and on as well. So I think teaching our kids to see what we can be thankful for and to express that gratitude. And what you come to find out is that when you feel that sense of gratitude, you have this desire to live generously and to sort of pay that forward and to live optimistically with hope. Whereas again, it's, what are you focusing on? Are you focusing on the really bad things? The war right now over in Ukraine it's a terrible thing. What good is going to come out of that? What can we be grateful for? Sit down with your kids and talk about that. I know that this is scary for you kids, but what can we talk about that makes us grateful for it? What's really grateful is that there's people all around the world praying for the same people right now. I mean, that's something that's good. Or we're actually finding out where Ukraine is on the map.
Right, exactly.
Or we're learning about things that were happening in Russia that we didn't know were happening before. Those are good things. So I think always trying to flip things on their heads and seeing what can we be grateful for in every situation, and unplug your kids when they come home from school. Make them go outside and play. Go outside with them, and if your kids are older, shoot basketball with them and talk to them while you're shooting baskets with them. It's a great time to talk to them. And we have lots of dogs in my house, and so sometimes it's like, let's just take the dogs for a walk. We just take the dogs for a walk and talk. So kids want to talk to somebody. If they don't have you to talk to as a parent, they're going to find another adult to talk to, and you might not trust that adult to advise them well. So make sure that you're the adult that's available to them. And people are like, oh, my teenager doesn't want to talk to me anymore. Like, you might be surprised. Your teenager probably does want to talk to you more than you know, and you might just not be available for that teenager. So I think it's up to us to create a positive atmosphere in our homes as much as we can. And it's hard for us because we're seeing the 24/7 news too. And so we have a lot of those negative thoughts going through our heads. So I think we first have to do it for ourselves. What can we be grateful for? And how can we see things through a positive lens? And then we are able to do that with our kids.
That's the challenging part too, is, you're to watch what you're saying yourself.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, what you're putting out onto social media and things like that. And if your kids are watching, like,
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, because they might, see that and say, well, I saw what you wrote, Mom.
And they see and hear a lot more than we think. So I think we do have to use our words in a measured way. There was a time, I think, where when I was a kid, at least, when the adults had a conversation, it was time for the kids to leave the room. There were just certain conversations like that, and I don't think that happens anymore. I think everybody hears everything everybody says anymore. And we have to be careful that, our kids' shoulders just aren't strong enough to carry some of those weights. And we need to take that weight off of them and just let them be children. That is just a huge burden that I'm carrying right now, is that we are stealing their childhood from them because we're asking them to deal with adult issues. And back to our literature conversation, that sometimes just giving them a book where they can disappear into childhood and the sweet, mysterious, fantastical innocence of it all is it's good. It's, I don't think that is looking through life through rose-colored glasses. I think it's just securing childhood and the brief period of life that it is for them. So,
well, that's such a good point, because a lot of people will say, like, oh, are you trying to shelter them? And it's like, no, I think there's a difference between, sheltering and just making sure things are age appropriate,
absolutely,
age and developmentally appropriate. And I, like we're talking about with boundaries, I've seen this, the blurring of the lines to where kids are being burdened with fixing adult problems and carrying adult, emotions around, even to the extent of, where I've heard teachers say things like, the adults have screwed it up, and so now it's on you to fix it, kind of thing, which does two things. I mean, now they're trying to, like, alienate the children from their parents and their grandparents, people like that, but they're also laying on them that responsibility, which can only result in anger and resentment. The kids aren't going to be able to, like, all right, let's do this thing, like, that's it's not how that's going to work.
They're not ill-equipped. They haven't read about the knights slaying the dragons. All they know about are the dragons. And so, I agree. It's we are definitely doing our children a disservice right now. And
so what do you, what would you like to say to teachers who are, who are putting this stuff in front of kids? Like, what would you like to say to them as far as
stop it?
Yeah,
I mean, unfortunately, the teachers who are putting this stuff in front of them are not, in my opinion, are not interested in cultivating that pursuit of excellence and that appreciation of beauty and that civic virtue. That's not their aim. Their aim is to cultivate social justice warriors. I mean, it truly is. In fact, in a lot of the teacher education programs, that's what their goal is. We need to make sure that we're raising up a generation that's going to change the world. It's like, you change the world by changing, yourself. And that's, so to those teachers, I would say, you're in the wrong business. You should get out and go be a social justice warrior. There's jobs, there's paying jobs that you can go be an activist in the community, and you can do that. And if young people want to join you, then great, but it doesn't belong in the classroom. You have to first equip them with just that foundation of, well, I think that you need to first teach them that there is good in the world. There's bad, but there's good. And I think that gets missed there too. So, so to the adults, the teachers in the classrooms that are doing this to the students, I would just say, stop it.
Yeah, for real.
This.
Now, do you have a book list? Do you have like a favorite list of books or that you keep somewhere, like, all the books you should read before you graduate high school kind of thing?
I actually found the book list from Hillsdale there, and they break it down by age, that like by the time you get out of third grade, your child should have read all of these books. And I agree with every book that's on the list. I've come across some other books. I actually created a book list like that one way back in the 90s when I was in college to be a teacher. And every book that's in there, I still 100% support. There's way more books in there that I could ever read in a year, but they're at least enough to know. And then of course, with my 4 kids, we loved to read together. I mean, gosh, I read to my kids out loud until they were in middle school. They were voracious readers. They could have read every book themselves, but that was just our time together to read. We enjoyed reading together and sharing the stories together. So through them, I obviously know what books are good and what books are kind of trash. In fact, my oldest son, the other night, he was home and he quoted something from one of the Magic Treehouse books. And he was like, do you know what that's from? And I'm like, yeah, Magic Treehouse.
How funny.
I mean, and again, that's not necessarily quality literature, but we all did learn a lot from the Magic Treehouse books.
Well, yeah.
But it's just funny how we came to find out which books were really good. We loved reading those together. And then other books were like, kind of thing. So that's personal preference, I guess, too. But I will say each one of mine had a different genre that they loved. And so that was kind of fun to do as well. But yeah, there are books out there. There is a Twitter feed that I follow that's suggested reading K through 12. Some of the books I like that but they're good lists. I would just say to any parent, make sure that you at least have an idea of the content before you let your kid read them. I think that unfortunately we have to be more leery of the books that are being published today than the books that were published in the past. And that's one of the reasons I think I like classics, is because they're fairly safe. And I know that there's really heavy topics. I've read To Kill a Mockingbird. I've read The Kite Runner. I understand that, but it's very different than the books that are out there today, like, Genderqueer, All Boys Aren't Blue, and, those kinds of books. So I would just say, be aware of the content that some of these books have in them. And if parents are okay with their kids reading that, that's fine. I would not have been okay with my kids reading those. So, but Hillsdale, you can't go wrong with their literature list. It's extensive. You can, actually, years ago, Ben Sass put out a list that he has his kids read, because he and his wife were homeschooling and all these. And so there's fiction and there's nonfiction. There's some like speeches and some founding documents and that kind of thing that I would sometimes take off for my kids to read. And I'm like, okay, I'll pay you $5 if you read this one. And I'm like, well, I thought it was a worthy investment. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Boring, but I'm like, you need to know that. And I'm not sure that you would read it if I didn't pay you. So here you go. Like,
exactly.
So, you can definitely incorporate fiction in there as well. And, but yeah, I would just say to parents now more than ever, just be very careful with what's being published, because unfortunately there are adults in the world that want our children for some reason to be exposed to things that are beyond their ability to carry, in my opinion.
For sure. And so last question, what do you think would be, what do you think would be the best outcome of like school reform? There's so many movements now to try to fix schools, take back schools, whatever. What is your sort of dream? Like, what would you like to see happen as a result of all the attention focused now on what's happening in schools, not happening in schools? What do you think is the most important thing that could happen?
Parental involvement, I think, is a huge thing, and I don't mean parents going in and running the PTA. I think parents actually being engaged in their kids' learning. I was accused this morning of wanting to dismantle public schools, and I was like, well, no, dismantling institutions is what the left does. We're really just interested in allowing parents to have the opportunity to choose the best learning environment for their student, whether that's a public school, a private school, a home school, a micro school, whatever it is. Just for parents to really examine the education process, and how it's going to impact their student. I think before it was like, well, what scores did this school get and what scores did that school get? That's the best school I want to send my kid to. Where I think now parents are realizing it's a lot more than just test scores. Obviously, test scores matter, even though there's controversy over that. But it's just about, like, how do I want my child shaped, and giving all parents the opportunity to choose that. And that means that conservative parents get to choose that, and the more liberal leaning parents get to choose that. I think that just sort of going back to the idea that our children belong to us. They are our responsibility. Their education is our responsibility. It's really nice and lovely that we live in a country that offers an education system, but it's our responsibility, and we need to pay attention to it more than just writing a check to pay tuition, or more than just making sure that they have their pencils sharpened on the first day of school. That it needs to be an engagement thing. So I think that ideally coming out of this, you would see parents just really heavily engaged with their students' learning on all levels, and never handing that responsibility back over to the government.
So just be less of a default maneuver and more like, a conscious choice. Like, I've given it some thought. My philosophy of education for my child is X, and therefore I'm looking for this kind of a school, and this type of approach works for me, and I think this will work well for my child, and being able to choose that. So something more along the lines of like a school choice, but with the dollars following the children, maybe, like, so that
Yeah,
the
I
parents can
think
choose.
that's so important. Yeah, I absolutely think it's important. I think there's no reason why that isn't happening. I really don't. Well, I know the reasons why that's not happening. But yeah, I mean, if the focus is on educating your child, then you should be fighting to be able to take your child's education dollars to the learning environment that best suits them. And again, for most families, that's probably still going to be a public school setting of some sort. It just, I mean, in all the places where that, school choice is an option, it still is public schools, and that's fine.
Right.
But I hope that those parents understand that that's going to require engagement more than just how was your day at school, or conferences twice a year. That really taking this on as a responsibility, because whether you like it or not, schools are shaping your child's heart, mind, and soul. And
Right.
you need to make sure that
They're raising your kids.
they are,
So
and I think that that's it's important for us to remember that. So
right. I mean, you'd like to think it would be a positive addition to their lives, but I think realistically, it never really was as much as people might have thought it was. In other words, it wasn't necessarily as bad, but
right.
I think we have a tendency to romanticize the past a little bit, and I'm not sure it ever was there ever were the halcyon days of, public school. I think it always was a little less than it ought to have been. And it's just now that we're realizing it's much less than it ought to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, I saw somebody shared a statistic where I think it was one of my school board members actually, with that, we have 50%, literacy rate or whatever. And like, that means that 50% of the kids are on grade level, and that's fine. Like and I'm like, ooh, when in America did we become okay with 50% of our children, being proficient in reading? Just one of the, so yeah, we've certainly started to settle for mediocrity at some point along the way. And I
Right.
think, parents would never do that if they were in the day-to-day involvement of that. We would not be okay with that. But for some reason we distanced ourselves enough. And I myself included, even though I was very involved in the schools, I missed a lot of this, and
Right.
am now realizing so much of it. So
Yeah. And I think to that end, parents need to sort of take back their own expertise,
yeah,
in the sense that, don't let yourself be cowed that you don't, because you don't have a certain degree or certain training, that you're not an expert on your child.
Right.
You know, especially in those younger years where
Yeah.
it really makes such a big difference. I mean, you know them best, that before they set foot in a school, you know how they've been every day. So that's, don't discount that. That's huge. They've learned a lot before they ever went to school.
Yeah. And I mean, I had a mom that I was working with. Her daughter was in fifth grade, but probably reading about second or third grade level. And she went to the school repeatedly and said, this isn't working. She's not learning to read. She's not. And they said, she's fine. She's fine. They kept telling her she's fine. And they're still telling her she's fine. She's in fifth grade. She's going to go to middle school reading probably on a third grade level. And they're telling her she's fine. And I'm like, she's not fine. And unfortunately, the mom doesn't necessarily have the skills or resources to advocate for her daughter in a way that she feels confident. I'm telling her, I'm like, you've got everything it takes to go in there and do that. But she doesn't feel confident in doing that. And so, yeah, I think if you think there's something wrong, if you aren't happy with where your child's at, very likely there is something wrong, and it needs to be addressed. So
I think what I would probably say to parents is that if you were talking about your child's health, and you thought there was something wrong, they were limping, or they had a perpetual like sniffle, stuffy nose or something like that, and somebody said they're fine, they're fine, they're fine, you wouldn't take that.
right.
You wouldn't just accept that. You would say, I can see that my child is sick. I can see that something is not right. And it wouldn't matter that the person had a white lab coat or whatever. You would say, this, I know what healthy looks like. Well, I would just like to encourage parents to look at their children's skills, whether it's reading or writing or math or whatever, the same way, because those deficits will translate into other problems,
Absolutely.
likely behavior and or mental health problems. That's where it comes from. So they're not fine.
Right.
And you may not know how to fix it, but that it's not right. And the squeaky wheel, I hate to say it, but that is just the fact. The squeaky wheel is they're not going to just magically fix it. And everything will build on that. Like you said, if they go off to middle school with that deficit, they're not catching up.
No. And they're unfortunately going to be in situations where behaviors are going to be a big problem. So yeah, the medical thing that's a great analogy. You're right. No parent would stand for that. No parent, it doesn't matter how many degrees the doctor has on their wall. It's,
no, I mean, your kid's sick, your kid's sick. You're just like, that they're not fine. And
right.
I mean, I had that exact scenario with my eldest daughter when she was a baby, and she was starting to lose weight for some reason, and she started to turn blue, and I went to the pediatrician and I said, something's not right. And he said, well, I can't find anything. What do you want me to do? And I said, I want you to draw blood. Well, I don't know what I'm looking for. He says, well, maybe you'll find it. And, and he's telling me, he's like, I'm the doctor. And I said, I don't care. My daughter's blue, like when something isn't right, so trust yourself. Like that's what I would say. And your child probably, if they're not fine, they're going to know they're not fine. And it will be reflected in their demeanor, how much they don't like school, etc. Kids who are doing well are happier in school. Mm-hmm. And kids who are not doing well are not happy in school. I mean, it's common sense. You don't want to go somewhere where you feel inept.
Right.
And you don't want to feel like you're not good at something. So the teacher says your child's fine and your child's sitting there like, I don't want to go to school. The child's not fine. So, that's just, but, well, I thank you so much for coming and talking to me today about these issues. And I'm really excited for you about your program that you're doing, your volunteer teaching. It sounds like it's going really, really well.
It's fantastic. It's my favorite time of the week.
I bet. I know, like I told you about with tutoring, I absolutely love introducing kids to, quality literature. I don't know. It's just so much fun. I don't understand why more teachers don't want to do it.
I know.
I mean, to me, it's like the most fun thing you could ever do is just see their eyes light up and, get into a animated conversation with them about something. I don't know if I had that opportunity to do it, I would certainly do it. But, right now those jobs are occupied by the social justice warriors. They don't want me.
If they had more quality literature, maybe they would be happier people. I don't know.
Maybe they would. Maybe they would. But thank you so, so much for spending this time
Absolutely.
with
Thank
us.
you.
And good luck with everything. And
Thanks.
thank you to everybody who came and joined in this conversation and listened in. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thanks so much.